Time for my explainer on the program tonight. Now, there was much excitement and anticipation when the president made a declaration, or rather a directive, in his Mashujaa Day speech yesterday regarding listing of persons who owe money to several financial institutions with the Credit Reference Bureau, also known as the CRB. Listen.
Authorities will, for loans less than 5 million, effect a moratorium of listings in CRBs for a period of 12 months to the end of September 2022. And further, borrowers with loans below 5 million and below, listed on the CRB from October 2020 to date, will not have that listing incorporated in their credit reports for the next 12 months, ending September 2022.
So let's understand that directive a little bit better now before we all go into celebration mode. And to help us understand this, I am speaking to Kenyatta, who's the regional manager for East and Southern Africa of Credit Info. Credit Info is one of the 3 licensed Credit Reference Bureau in the country, or CRB organizations. Kamau, good evening, and thank you for speaking with us on The Explainer tonight. Let's start with who this directive is meant for. Is it meant for everybody who has borrowed? Is it meant for everybody who owes money to financial institutions under 5 million?
Good evening, Yvonne. Now, if we're to take it directly from the president's speech, the focus was on MSMEs. So I think that we will hear more about it, but it seems to be directed at MSMEs and not everyone. All so right. That needs to be clear. If you look at the speech as it was said, it is specific.
All right, specific to MSMEs and, those who run small businesses, which, as we have said here on the show several times, employs a big percentage of Kenyans in the country. But so, like many of the directives, perhaps Kenyans are thinking, okay, so today, has this taken effect? Have you stopped listing all of these people or businesses that owe 5 million and below for the next 1 year? How soon would this take effect, and what would it take for that to happen?
So again, the order was, Treasury was to consult stakeholders to see how this directive can be implemented. So the Treasury is yet to sit down with the stakeholders and then define the way this will be implemented in terms of listing.
So obviously not happening immediately right now. Who are these stakeholders? What would that roundtable look like?
So that would be, Treasury, Central Bank, probably the banks through Kenya Bankers Association, and probably the bureaus as well through the association. We are yet to get directive from the Treasury on who those stakeholders would be.
Yeah, and I know you said, there would be conversations around that. What would be, up for discussion on the table? What would be the nature? I'm not asking you to predict what you're going to say, but what would the nature of the discussions be like between all of the stakeholders you've mentioned?
I think what is very critical is that we need to get a very clear understanding of what the definition of a MSME is. There needs to be a clear separation between a MSME and an individual. So that definition would need to be defined so that the directive can be followed through as directed by the president.
And what else, would you be discussing when to begin it? Because it said it was for a year up until, this time, September 2022. So if you're yet to have the talks and you're going to go into terms and definitions, in your view, is this something that will happen in the next week, month? Where do you see this going?
Once it's defined and it's agreed what the MSME is, then it's the reporting of these files to the Credit Bureau is done at least once a month or, every week. So it will just be reflected immediately. So it's not something that will take a very long time to be implemented once it's clear on what the directive and the definition of the MSMEs is.
All right, and having worked in this space, Kamau, how do you think this will help those SMEs that it's set to benefit? How do you think it'll spur economic growth as per what the president said, in his economic stimulus directive? How will this help the small business owner who owes money to a bank, a SACCO, or any other institution?
I mean, the repression of data to the Bureau I don't see how that would have an impact on the MSME. In fact, it's probably going to be the direct opposite. If there's no data to enable the banks or the lenders to be able to properly evaluate the risk of this MSME, the probability is that they will not lend to them, because the assumption is I do not have enough information to be able to evaluate your risk. So the suppression of this data to the Bureau might actually have the direct opposite impact from what the intention was of the directive.
But won't it benefit those who've been negatively listed? And we'll come to that explanation in a moment. But won't it help those who perhaps have been unable to pay their loans and therefore would suffer an adverse or credit score with the Credit Reference Bureau, that this might then actually help them when they're borrowing from lenders?
No, you see, again, remember, the bank's primary objective is to protect depositors' cash. Now, for them to go and lend money to people who they do not understand the risk is going to be very difficult. In effect, what might, if they have to lend, it would mean that secured lending will have to go away, and we go back to collateralized lending, where these people would have to bring some sort of collateral in order for the bank to feel safe enough to lend that money onto them. That is the issue. As long as a bank does not feel it is possible to lend because they don't understand the risk, then they will hold back.
All right, and it's interesting that we talk about this because it's been controversial as to the benefits of having, a credit score or a listing. So let's talk about that now. Now that I have you here, an opportunity to understand how the listing works. For our viewers, let's take a look at, at these graphics. We know from you and all the other Credit Reference Bureau in the country that there's about 15 million people who've been listed at the various CRB, and over 300,000 businesses that have been listed as well. So explain to us, Kamau, then, what listing actually means. Now that we have you, lots of Kenyans really wanting to know, when they see 15 million and 300,000 businesses, they're thinking, oh my gosh, are these all defaulters? Explain to Kenyans here tonight what listing at a CRB means and how it can be beneficial to those who've been listed.
So basically, a listing is a record of any loan or form of credit that you take from a bank that is reported to the Credit Bureau. So the minute you get a facility from a bank or any other microfinance or a SACCO, that information is reported to say that Kamau has taken this facility, and thereafter, every month they report on how I'm paying. So the better I repay my loans, the better chance it is for me to continue getting more loans and eventually probably even getting higher loans. So in effect, it is your credit CV. It's a CV to actually say, how does Kamau how has he behaved in the past when he's given a facility? A simple analogy would be, you can imagine getting money from, if you hear that there's a relative of yours who's been going around borrowing but doesn't pay, it's unlikely you'll give that money to that relative. However, if you've heard that that relative, whenever he borrows, he pays back, then it's very likely that if they come to you, you will lend to that same person. So it's a similar concept. It's just creating a history of your repayment so that the banks can see whether you're a good repairer or not, or a good risk or not.
And so how would a borrower be able to use this information, in their, perhaps when lending? I mean, I guess, can they take that credit score and, go to a bank and say, hey, I'm good for it. Why are you giving me this rate? Can you give me a lower rate? Tell us how lenders can then use the information that is domiciled with credit info, for instance, and how many times they can access it, at what cost, and how can they use it?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the whole idea. So the minute the individual has a good credit report, that then becomes a document that they can market themselves to different lenders. They have something they can go and say that I can prove myself as a good repairer and I should be good to get this facility. Now, the bank will then has the option of taking that person or not. depending on what their risk appetite is. But the idea is that this person can now move from bank to bank to look for credit at a rate that is favorable to them, because now the power is back to the consumer and not necessarily the bank, because they have a score, they have a track record to show the good history they have had in the past.
And how do they get that information from you?
So the credit reports can be accessed by you're entitled to one free credit report a year. Over and above that, all the 3 bureaus have provided platforms to which individuals can access their report whenever they want. But every individual is entitled to one free credit report every year.
All right, Kamau Kenyatta, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you very much for coming on. Regional Manager, East and Southern Africa at Credit Info. Perhaps not so optimistic about how this listing or the moratorium on the listing would benefit the MSME sector. So it's not just for everybody, but and also it'll not take effect immediately. The National Treasury still has to sit down with stakeholders in the industry to then make sure that they work towards effecting that. And indeed, the President did say that in his speech. Kamau Kenyatta from Credit Info, we thank you very much for coming on and helping us understand that directive on CRB. That's our explainer tonight. We take a break. We're back with the day's business news.